Malik Carter had always known that the world didn't always see him for who he truly was. As a black artist in a predominantly white, elitist art world, he faced constant rejection, ridicule, and underestimation. But on this particular day, in the sterile, cold walls of Charles Lyell's renowned gallery, the mockery reached its peak. The gallery was located in the heart of the city's art district, an area known for its chic sophistication and exclusivity. The walls were adorned with expensive, large-scale paintings and sculptures by the art world's most celebrated names. It was a place where only the finest, most refined works could find a home, and Charles Lyell, the gallery owner, was regarded as one of the most influential curators in the industry. But for all his prestige and influence, he had one fatal flaw: his inability to see beyond the surface. Malik entered the gallery with the same quiet determination he'd always carried with him. His portfolio, wrapped in a leather case, was clutched firmly in his hand. As he walked through the gallery's entryway, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the sound of hushed voices discussing the latest art trends. He could feel the judgmental eyes of the visitors on him, their gaze lingering not on his art but on his appearance, a young black man in a hoodie, standing among the world's most elite patrons of the arts. Charles Lyell, dressed in an immaculate tailored suit, stood near the back of the gallery, his sharp eyes scanning the room. When he saw Malik, he gave him a passing glance, barely registering the artist's presence. As Malik approached him, Lyell's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Ah, you must be the one with the unique portfolio," Lyell said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I have to admit, I'm curious. What exactly do you think you're contributing to this space?" Malik clenched his jaw, but his voice remained steady. "I'm here to show you my work. I believe it has something valuable to offer." Lyell raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Oh, I'm sure. But I'll warn you, we don't typically feature work that doesn't meet certain standards," he said, gesturing vaguely at the contemporary pieces displayed around them. "You see, art is about sophistication, vision. It's about transcending the mundane. Your style, well, let's just say it's not quite what we're looking for." Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He knew exactly what Lyell meant. He had heard those words before: not quite what we're looking for, primitive, unrefined. His art, a bold fusion of sci-fi elements and deep cultural symbolism, was often dismissed as too abstract, too raw, too unconventional. But that didn't stop him from creating. "I believe my work speaks for itself," Malik said, opening his portfolio to reveal the vibrant paintings and sculptures that had been born from his imagination. Each piece was a blend of intricate patterns, bold color palettes, and futuristic depictions of human resilience, images of powerful, defiant humans battling alien invaders in a world where survival meant rejecting oppression and embracing strength. Lyell's eyes scanned the artwork briefly, and then he scoffed. "Oh, I see. Aliens and humans, fighting in some distant, dystopian future. How quaint," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It's cute, really. But this," he gestured to the pieces with a mockingly exaggerated flourish, "this is not art. This is child's play. You need to understand that real art comes from a place of refinement, a place where you elevate the human experience. This," he pointed to a painting depicting a heroic human figure standing tall against a wave of alien ships, "is nothing more than fantasy. The masses may eat it up, but this will never find a place in my gallery." Malik's blood boiled, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had heard worse before, but it never got easier. He was used to being told that his work wasn't sophisticated enough, that it was too raw, too unpolished. The art world, with its rigid expectations and exclusionary practices, had always found reasons to dismiss him. And Charles Lyell, with his insufferable smugness, embodied all that was wrong with it. "You don't understand," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about aliens and fantasy. It's about the human spirit, the fight for survival, the power to resist, the strength to overcome. My art is not meant to be pretty. It's meant to make people feel something, make them see the potential of humanity in the face of adversity. That's the power of art." Lyell smirked. How quaint, indeed. Listen, you're a talented kid, but you need to understand that your work is simply not the right fit for this space. It's not sophisticated enough, not polished enough to be taken seriously. Maybe you should focus on smaller galleries or, he paused, looking over Malik's shoulder at the other visitors, or consider some abstract expressionism for the local coffee shop. But you're wasting your time here. The words stung, and Malik could feel the weight of years of rejection and underestimation crushing down on him. He fought to keep his composure, refusing to let Lyle see how deeply his words had hurt. He knew the fight for recognition wouldn't be easy. But one thing was clear, Charles Lyle was wrong. Malik was more than just a struggling artist. He was a creator with a vision, and he would find a way to prove it to the world. I'll be going, Malik said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly as he closed the portfolio. But I'll leave you with this. One day, people will see the value in what I create. And when they do, they'll remember this moment, the moment when you mocked the very thing that could change the world. With those words, Malik turned and walked out of the gallery, his head held high despite the sting of rejection. As he stepped out into the crisp air of the city streets, he knew that this encounter wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning of something much greater. The day he was underestimated was the day he decided to prove the world wrong. And Malik Carter was determined to make sure that when people finally saw his art, they would remember the name, the vision, and the power of humanity that his work represented. In that moment, as he walked down the street, Malik didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change. The day the humans were underestimated was the day they would begin to rise. And Malik, with his relentless spirit, would be one of the pioneers leading the charge. The days that followed Malik's encounter with Charles Lyle were filled with a quiet storm of determination. His rejection, though painful, ignited a fire within him. The words of the gallery owner echoed in his mind, yet instead of feeling defeated, Malik felt driven. He wasn't going to let someone else's narrow view of art define his path. The world, he believed, was ready for a new kind of narrative, one that honored the complexity, beauty, and resilience of the human spirit. Back in his small, dimly lit studio apartment, Malik pulled out his paints, brushes, and tools. The place was cluttered with canvases, sketches, and half-finished sculptures, a chaotic reflection of his creative mind. But it was in this chaos that Malik thrived. Each stroke, each line, was a part of his larger vision, a vision that transcended the limitations of his own struggles. For the past few weeks, Malik had been working on a new collection. It was different from anything he had done before. While his earlier works had focused on a mix of human history and fantastical elements, this new series was deeply inspired by the concept of humanity's fight for freedom. It was a theme that Malik had always been passionate about but had never fully explored. Now, it felt urgent. The series would feature humans at their most defiant, standing tall against enormous alien invaders, fighting for survival not just with technology, but with courage, intelligence, and the unbreakable will to survive. The human figures in the artwork would be strong, powerful, and radiant. They would not be the submissive victims of a sci-fi narrative, but the heroes, the ones who fought back and reclaimed their future. One of the first pieces Malik worked on was called Resilience, which depicted a lone human soldier standing in front of a massive alien ship. The ship, dark and menacing, hovered above the soldier, its alien markings glowing ominously. The soldier, however, stood unafraid, her eyes fierce with determination. In one hand, she gripped a weapon of unknown technology, while the other was raised to the sky, as if challenging the invaders to bring their worst. Behind her, a fiery sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and red, symbolizing the strength of humanity in the face of an overwhelming foe. As Malik worked on the piece, he felt a connection to the character he had created. She wasn't just a soldier, she was an embodiment of everything Malik had faced in his own life. The way the world had tried to push him down, the way his art had been dismissed, and how every challenge had only made him stronger. This soldier was humanity, a reflection of the resilience that Malik himself had cultivated in the face of adversity. The next piece, titled Unity, showed a group of humans, of all races and backgrounds, united in a fierce battle against the alien invaders. Their expressions were a mixture of anger, fear, and determination. But what stood out in the piece was the sense of collective power. The humans weren't fighting alone, they were fighting as one, bound together by an unbreakable will. Malik knew that this was the message he wanted to share. Humanity's strength lay in its unity, in the way people from all walks of life could come together to face an existential threat. His art was beginning to take shape, and with every brushstroke, Malik felt himself becoming more and more confident in his vision. But what made this collection different from anything he had done before was the story behind it. It wasn't just about beautiful images. It was about telling a larger narrative, a story of resistance, survival, and strength that Malik believed the world needed to hear. This was his response to the mockery he had faced, to the rejection, and to the systemic barriers that had tried to silence him. His art would be the answer. As the weeks passed, Malik worked tirelessly, fueled by a sense of purpose that was both exhilarating and exhausting. He often found himself working late into the night, his eyes burning from exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The work had taken on a life of its own, and Malik could feel the weight of the story he was telling pressing against his chest. He was creating a world where humans were no longer victims, they were heroes. One afternoon, as Malik was putting the finishing touches on a particularly striking piece called The Last Stand, his phone buzzed on the cluttered table next to him. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was a message from an unknown number. The message was brief, but it caught his attention immediately. "I saw your work. It's time the world knows what you're capable of." Malik stared at the message for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could it be? His first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but something about the tone of the message felt different. There was a sense of urgency in it, a feeling that this person knew exactly what Malik was doing and saw the potential in his work. He hesitated for only a moment before replying. "Who is this?" A few seconds later, another message came through. "Someone who sees the value in your art. Someone who believes in your vision." Malik's pulse quickened. This was no random message, it felt like the kind of message an art patron or collector would send. But how could they have found him? His art wasn't even publicly displayed yet, and he hadn't sent it to any galleries after his encounter with Lyle. The idea that someone out there was already recognizing his potential made his heart race with excitement. The conversation continued. "I'm interested in acquiring your work for a private collection. I believe your art deserves to be seen by the world." Malik felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when someone recognized the value in his vision. He was still hesitant, but the possibility of this mysterious collector believing in him was too great to ignore. "Are you sure?" "I'm not a known artist. My work. I know exactly who you are, Malik. And I believe the world needs to see your message. Let's talk more. You're ready." Malik sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't anticipated that his art would be noticed so quickly, nor that it would be sought after by someone so influential. But there was no turning back now. The message was clear, he had found his voice, and someone out there believed in it. In the following days, Malik met with the mysterious collector, who turned out to be a wealthy art patron with deep connections in the international art scene. The collector had been following Malik's work from the moment it first appeared on social media, and he was convinced that Malik's unique blend of sci-fi and cultural depth would resonate with a wider audience. He offered to purchase several of Malik's pieces, for a sum far greater than anything Malik had ever imagined. This wasn't just about selling his art. It was about validation, recognition, and an opportunity to share his vision with the world. Malik's art, which had once been dismissed as too raw and unrefined, was now poised to enter the international stage. It wasn't just the work that had value, it was the story behind it, the narrative of resistance and strength, that was beginning to captivate the world. Malik's life was about to change. His art was no longer something to be hidden or mocked. It was something the world would soon have no choice but to acknowledge. And as the collector left Malik's studio that day, shaking his hand and promising to launch an exhibition that would rival the greatest artists in history, Malik knew that this was just the beginning. The world was about to witness the rise of a new force in the art world, and it was going to be a force that would not be silenced. Malik sat in his small, cluttered studio, his fingers aching from hours of painting, yet his mind raced with excitement. The message from the mysterious collector still echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that the world was beginning to see his art, his vision, and his passion. The collector had come to him, expressing an unwavering belief in his work, and offering to help take it to a scale Malik had only dreamed of. He had been skeptical at first, even after meeting with the collector in person. But there was something undeniably genuine in the way the man spoke about Malik's art. He had recognized its depth, its bold narrative, and the raw emotion that each piece carried. And what intrigued Malik even more was the collector's cryptic confidence that his art was more than just a series of paintings and sculptures, it was a movement waiting to be unleashed upon the world. The collector had made it clear that he had access to networks, wealthy patrons, and galleries that could elevate Malik's work beyond anything he had ever imagined. He offered to buy several pieces, starting with Resilience and Unity, for a sum that Malik could scarcely believe. The collector promised an exhibition that would introduce Malik's work to the most influential art figures in the world. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a chance to change the narrative around Malik's art. Days turned into weeks, and the art world slowly began to take notice. The mysterious collector, whose name Malik still didn't know, made good on his promise. He facilitated the sale of Malik's pieces to private collectors across the globe, all the while keeping his identity hidden. Malik, for the first time in his life, was starting to see his work recognized, not just as art, but as something powerful, something that conveyed a message much larger than himself. The world was finally beginning to hear what Malik had always known: humans were strong, resilient, and capable of extraordinary things. The alien battles depicted in his art weren't just about otherworldly creatures and futuristic technology, they were metaphors for the battles humans faced every day in the real world. The struggle for equality, the fight for survival, the defiance in the face of oppression, they were all present in Malik's work. And now, others were starting to see it. But there was still one person who remained oblivious to the growing recognition of Malik's talent: Charles Lyell. Lyell's dismissive comments about Malik's work hadn't left his mind, and Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the gallery owner's arrogance would eventually come back to haunt him. Despite Malik's newfound success, the memory of Lyell's mockery lingered. And as Malik's reputation grew, so did the desire to prove him wrong. One afternoon, as Malik stood in front of his latest piece, The Last Stand, the phone rang. It was a call he had been expecting. The mysterious collector had arranged for an art dealer to meet Malik at a prestigious gallery in the city. Malik's heart raced as he picked up the phone. "Malik," the collector's voice echoed through the line. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. I believe it's time to take this to the next level." The collector had arranged for Malik to showcase his work at one of the most exclusive art exhibitions in the world. The gallery was known for hosting only the most renowned artists, those who had earned their place through years of recognition and acclaim. Malik had never imagined that his art would be featured alongside the works of established icons. But now, the time had come to step into the limelight. The gallery was filled with hushed voices and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. The walls were adorned with massive paintings of surreal landscapes, intricate sculptures, and minimalist works that spoke volumes through their simplicity. But despite the exclusivity of the event, all eyes were on Malik's pieces. They were different. The energy in the room shifted the moment people laid eyes on Resilience and Unity. There was an undeniable power in them, an energy that made everyone stop and stare. As Malik stood in front of his work, he couldn't help but notice the quiet whispers between visitors. The art critics, the gallery owners, and the patrons were all speaking in hushed tones, clearly intrigued by what they saw. His art was sparking conversation, drawing attention in a way Malik had never thought possible. For the first time, he could feel that his work was being recognized for the right reasons, not because of its form or technique, but because of its message. It wasn't long before Malik noticed a familiar face in the crowd, the same face that had once mocked him. Charles Lyell stood at the far side of the room, his eyes scanning the artwork, his posture stiff. Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as he watched the gallery owner take in resilience. He could see the discomfort in Lyell's eyes as he realized what he had missed. Lyell made his way over to Malik, his footsteps slow, deliberate. When he reached Malik, he stopped for a moment, staring at the pieces in front of him, as if unsure of how to proceed. Finally, he spoke. "I must admit, Malik, I didn't think your work would resonate this way," Lyell said, his voice strained, as if the words were hard to swallow. "You've really made a name for yourself." Malik didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at Lyell, allowing the silence to linger. He had spent years being told he wasn't enough, that his work was too raw, too unrefined. And now, here was Lyell, the very man who had dismissed him, standing before him with a look of begrudging respect. "You don't get to decide what art is anymore," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "Not for me, not for anyone else. My work speaks for itself." Lyell's eyes flickered, a brief moment of defensiveness flashing across his face. "I didn't know at the time," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was just a phase." Malik gave him a small, knowing smile. "We all make mistakes, don't we?" The gallery owner's expression softened slightly, though his pride remained unshaken. "Well, it seems I was wrong," Lyell said. "You've certainly found your place here, and I can't deny that your work has caught the attention of the right people." Malik felt a surge of pride, but he didn't let it show. He had learned long ago that validation from people like Lyell wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the message he was putting out into the world, the message that humans were capable of incredible things, that they could overcome anything if they stood united. "Thank you," Malik replied, his voice steady. "But I don't need your approval anymore. The world already knows." And with that, Malik turned away, his attention returning to the growing crowd around his pieces. As Lyell walked off, Malik couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. The world was finally recognizing his work, and it wasn't because of who he was or where he came from. It was because his art had something real to say, something that resonated on a deeper level. It wasn't just the art that had value. It was the story behind it. The story of humans fighting for their place in the world, overcoming obstacles, and proving that they were never truly forgotten. As the exhibition continued, Malik could feel the tide of change sweeping over the art world. He had found his place, and nothing, least of all Charles Lyell, could take that away from him. Malik's world had shifted completely. What had begun as a solitary journey of self-expression had evolved into something far greater. His work was no longer just about painting or sculpture, it had become a movement, one that resonated with people across the globe. As the mysterious collector promised, Malik's pieces were now part of prestigious exhibitions, private collections, and even public spaces. Each new display brought with it a deeper recognition, not just for Malik, but for the message his art carried. The story of Malik's rise began to spread like wildfire. People who had once dismissed him, gallery owners, critics, and collectors, were now scrambling to acquire his work. What had started as a quiet revolution in a small studio had now become a global phenomenon. The art world, as it often does, had a tendency to embrace what it once rejected. And in Malik's case, the world wasn't just embracing his art, it was embracing his message. In the months following the exhibition, his pieces were featured in some of the world's most influential art magazines, including Art Plus Culture and Global Perspectives. His work was being analyzed and praised for its bold, unapologetic depiction of human resilience and strength. Malik's unique blend of sci-fi, human history, and personal struggle created a narrative that was both universally relatable and deeply personal. But it wasn't just the critics who were taking notice. The people, the ones who had lived through their own battles, whether personal, societal, or cultural, were the ones who truly connected with Malik's vision. His art wasn't about spaceships and alien invaders, it was about the struggles that people faced every day. His characters were not just fighting for survival against external threats, they were fighting for justice, equality, and freedom. These were battles that the audience understood deeply. Social media exploded with images of Malik's work, accompanied by heartfelt messages from people who felt inspired by the themes in his art. Many viewers saw themselves in the fierce, defiant figures he painted, humans who stood strong in the face of adversity, who refused to be broken. Malik had unknowingly created a cultural touchstone, a piece of art that gave people hope in a time when it seemed in short supply. One morning, Malik woke up to an unexpected email in his inbox. It was from the head curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, one of the most respected art institutions in the world. They wanted to feature his work in a solo exhibition. The email was brief but direct. Dear Malik, we have been following your work for some time now, and it is our honor to invite you to present your collection at the Museum of Modern Art. Your art speaks to the universal human experience, and we believe it will resonate deeply with our audience. We look forward to working with you on this groundbreaking exhibition. Malik read the email twice, his heart pounding. The Museum of Modern Art had reached out to him, the artist who had once struggled to find his place in the world. The institution that had displayed works by artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Warhol was now offering him the same platform. It was a surreal moment. He had come so far, from the days when Charles Lyell had mocked him, to now being recognized by the highest echelons of the art world. But despite the overwhelming nature of the opportunity, Malik remained focused. He knew that this exhibition was more than just an opportunity to showcase his work. It was a chance to further cement the message he had fought so hard to share with the world. The MoMA exhibition would be his biggest show yet, a culmination of everything he had worked for. Malik's pieces would hang on the walls of one of the most famous art museums in the world, each painting and sculpture telling a part of the story of human strength, resilience, and the fight for justice. It would be his moment to stand at the forefront of a cultural shift, to show the world what it meant to be human in a time of crisis. Months of preparation followed as Malik worked tirelessly to prepare his collection for the exhibition. He made a few new pieces, ones that expanded on the themes of unity, survival, and defiance. One of the new works, The Awakening, depicted a group of people from different backgrounds, working together to break free from a towering, oppressive structure. The image was powerful, diverse, ordinary people standing together, united against a common enemy. This was Malik's vision of humanity in its strongest form, a force that could overcome any obstacle when people came together. The exhibition finally opened to the public, and the reaction was nothing short of overwhelming. Crowds gathered outside the museum, eager to see Malik's work in person. Inside, the walls were filled with his paintings and sculptures, each one telling a different chapter in the saga of human resilience. The response from visitors was immediate and emotional. Many people found themselves moved to tears as they stood before his art, recognizing their own struggles reflected in the characters he had created. At the opening reception, Malik stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by art critics, collectors, and curators, all of whom were praising his work. But it was the visitors, the ordinary people, who made the biggest impact on him. He overheard their conversations, their words of admiration, their expressions of gratitude. Many shared how Malik's art had inspired them to keep fighting, to stay strong in the face of hardship, to believe in themselves when the world seemed against them. One woman, an immigrant who had fled violence in her homeland, stood in front of Unity, with tears streaming down her face. "This is us," she whispered to her companion. "This is how we survive. We fight together. We're stronger together." The world had changed for Malik. His art had ignited a movement, one that transcended the boundaries of traditional galleries and exhibitions. What had started as a few paintings in a small studio had now become a global conversation, and Malik found himself at the center of that dialogue. The days of being ignored and dismissed by the art world felt like a distant memory. Now, he was the voice of a generation, one that was no longer willing to remain silent in the face of injustice. But with fame came new challenges. The pressure to constantly produce, to keep up with the demand for his work, weighed heavily on him. The invitations kept pouring in, requests for interviews, speaking engagements, collaborations, and commissions. Malik had never been one to chase fame, but now it seemed as though fame had found him. Everywhere he went, people recognized him, asking for his autograph or a photo, thanking him for his art, and expressing how it had changed their lives. The validation was overwhelming, and for the first time in his life, Malik understood what it felt like to be truly seen. Yet, even amidst the praise and recognition, Malik remained grounded. He hadn't created his art for fame or fortune. He had created it because he felt an urgent need to tell the stories of those who were forgotten, those who had been oppressed, those who had fought and struggled in silence. His work was about more than just self-expression, it was about amplifying the voices of the voiceless. One evening, as Malik sat in his studio, surrounded by canvases and unfinished sculptures, he received another email. This time, it was from an organization that worked with refugees and displaced persons around the world. The email began with a simple statement: "We've seen your work, and we believe your art can change the world." The message went on to explain that the organization was preparing for a major global event, a summit that would bring together world leaders, influencers, and activists to discuss the state of human rights, the environment, and global crises. They wanted Malik to be a key speaker at the event, and they also wanted to feature his art as part of the summit's theme of humanity in crisis. The invitation was surreal. To be asked to speak alongside global leaders and influential figures was an honor Malik hadn't expected. The summit would be held in Geneva, Switzerland, and would be attended by representatives from the United Nations, humanitarian organizations, and thought leaders from all over the world. It was a momentous occasion, and Malik was humbled to be a part of it. But he also knew that it was more than just a personal opportunity, it was a chance to use his platform for a greater purpose. The organization wanted Malik's art to be a visual representation of the summit's message. His pieces would be displayed at the venue, and his work would serve as the backdrop for discussions about global unity, human rights, and the urgent need for change. The goal was to show the world that, even in the darkest times, humanity had the power to rise above its challenges. As Malik prepared for the summit, he knew that this event would be different from anything he had ever done before. It wasn't just about showing his art to an audience, it was about making a statement, sending a message that would resonate with people from every corner of the globe. His art had already inspired millions, but now it had the potential to spark real-world change. When Malik arrived in Geneva, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The summit was being held at a massive conference center, with delegates and leaders from all over the world filling the halls. The space was decorated with large, imposing pieces of art, paintings, sculptures, and photographs that spoke to the challenges facing humanity. But Malik's work stood out. His pieces, with their striking depictions of strength and unity, commanded attention. Each piece told a story of resilience, of people overcoming adversity, of communities coming together to fight for a better future. During the opening ceremony, Malik was introduced to the audience as one of the featured speakers. As he stepped onto the stage, he was greeted with applause. He had spoken at art events before, but this was different. This was a room filled with politicians, diplomats, and leaders from every sector of society. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. He began his speech with a simple, yet profound statement: "The greatest battles we fight are not against aliens or invaders. They are the battles we fight every day, in our communities, in our homes, in our hearts." Malik went on to explain the inspiration behind his work, the struggles of ordinary people who had been pushed to the margins of society, the stories of resilience that often went untold. He spoke about how art could serve as both a mirror and a hammer, showing us who we are and what we are capable of, while also challenging us to be better, to do better. He shared stories of individuals he had met over the years, refugees, activists, survivors of war, and children who had been born into unimaginable hardship. These stories were the foundation of his art. His paintings were not just representations of battle, they were metaphors for the struggles of humanity. His art was a call to action, a call to stand up, to fight, and to unite. Art is the voice of the people, Malik concluded. It can speak louder than words, it can move mountains, and it can bring us together when nothing else can. It is time for humanity to answer the call. As Malik's fame and influence grew, so did the weight of his message. His art had reached new heights, from art galleries to global summits, but it was no longer just about showcasing talent, it had become the focal point of a movement. People from all walks of life were drawing strength from his work, uniting under the banner of hope, resilience, and collective action. The change that Malik had hoped for was beginning to take shape in ways he could never have imagined. Despite the success of the summit in Geneva, Malik knew that this was just the beginning. His vision had always been broader than any single exhibition or speech. He had a burning desire to do more, to not just inspire, but to spark tangible change in the world. Art could move hearts, but Malik understood that it was action that would bring lasting transformation. It was during a quiet evening in his studio, as he painted the final strokes of his latest piece, that Malik received a call that would shape the next chapter of his life. The call was from a prominent activist, Marcus Santos, who had been leading efforts to address the global refugee crisis. Marcus had been following Malik's journey since the early days and had been deeply moved by his work. He knew that Malik's art had the potential to bring new attention to the issues that were closest to his heart, issues that often went unnoticed by the public eye. "Malik," Marcus began, his voice urgent but hopeful, "we need you. The world is at a tipping point. The refugee crisis is escalating, and we're losing too many lives. Your art has already sparked a conversation. Now, it's time to take it further. We want to partner with you to launch a global campaign to raise awareness and bring real change. Will you stand with us?" Malik listened intently, feeling a sense of urgency rising within him. He had often spoken about unity and collective strength in his art, but now, he was being asked to put his words into action. This wasn't just about creating more pieces of art, it was about using his platform to make a direct impact on the lives of those suffering the most. "I'm in," Malik said without hesitation. "Tell me what we need to do." Together with Marcus and a coalition of activists, Malik began to plan a large-scale campaign that would use his art as both a symbol and a tool for raising awareness about the refugee crisis. The campaign would include a series of global exhibitions, fundraising efforts, and social media initiatives aimed at driving change. The goal was to create a worldwide conversation about the human cost of the refugee crisis and the need for immediate action. Malik knew that this campaign had to be different. It couldn't just be about raising money or awareness, it had to be about showing the world that these were not just statistics or faceless victims. The refugees were human beings, with stories, dreams, and families. His art had always focused on the power of the human spirit, and now it was time for that message to take on new meaning. The first phase of the campaign was an exhibition titled The Forgotten Faces. Malik worked tirelessly to create a new series of paintings that would highlight the personal stories of refugees, portraits of individuals and families caught in the chaos of displacement. Each piece would focus on a different aspect of the refugee experience, the fear of loss, the hope of survival, the trauma of leaving behind everything they knew. As the exhibition began to take shape, Malik and Marcus knew they needed to do more than just showcase these stories. They wanted to bring people face to face with the realities of the crisis. So, they decided to partner with a number of organizations that were working directly with refugees. The exhibition would not only raise awareness, but also raise funds for these organizations, directing resources to those who were doing the hard work on the ground. The opening of The Forgotten Faces took place in New York City, at the very gallery where Malik had once been rejected by Charles Lyell. This time, however, the gallery was overflowing with people, activists, philanthropists, media outlets, and everyday citizens. The message was clear: this was not just an art exhibition. It was a call to action. The night of the opening was a pivotal moment. As people walked through the gallery, they stopped in front of Malik's paintings, captivated by the raw emotion and humanity in each piece. One portrait, titled The Long Road, depicted a mother and child trudging through a barren landscape, their faces filled with both exhaustion and determination. Another piece, Home No More, showed a family standing in the ruins of a destroyed city, their backs turned, but with their heads held high. The reactions were powerful. Some visitors were moved to tears, while others stood silently, taking in the gravity of what they were seeing. It was impossible to ignore the stark reality of the crisis, and the exhibition was quickly covered by media outlets across the world. News anchors and journalists shared stories of the refugees featured in Malik's paintings, and the hashtag Forgotten Faces began trending on social media. But it wasn't just about raising awareness, it was about making sure people acted on what they had seen. Malik, Marcus, and the organizations they worked with had prepared an online platform that allowed people to donate directly to refugee aid programs. The exhibition wasn't just an art show, it was a fundraiser, a movement, and a plea for action. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from around the globe, from individuals who had been moved by the art and the stories behind it. Within weeks, the campaign had raised millions of dollars for refugee organizations. But perhaps even more important than the financial contributions was the shift in how people viewed the crisis. The exhibition sparked a renewed sense of empathy and urgency. Governments and leaders who had previously remained silent began to take action. Countries that had closed their borders started to reconsider their policies. International aid organizations ramped up their efforts, mobilizing resources to provide support to those in need. And for Malik, the impact was humbling. He had never expected that his art would spark such a widespread movement, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The exhibition had brought attention to the crisis, but the work was far from over. The world had taken notice, but now it was time for lasting, systemic change. The success of the Forgotten Faces led to even more opportunities for Malik to use his platform for good. He continued to work with Marcus and other activists, organizing further exhibitions, campaigns, and fundraising efforts. But more importantly, he remained focused on the ultimate goal, to remind the world that refugees were not just victims of a global crisis, they were people with dignity, worth, and the right to a future. As Malik sat in his studio one evening, reflecting on the success of the campaign, he realized something profound. The art he had created had always been about showing the strength of the human spirit. But now, his art was more than just a message, it was a vehicle for real change. And in that moment, Malik knew that the day humans had responded had not just arrived, it was here to stay. The world had witnessed an awakening. Malik's campaign had not only succeeded in bringing attention to the refugee crisis, but it had ignited a global movement for social justice, unity, and empathy. His art had been the spark, but the fire of change had been fueled by the collective will of millions who had seen the need for a better, more compassionate world. Months after the Forgotten Faces exhibition had concluded, Malik found himself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought him here. He had never set out to be a global figure, but his art had become a tool for activism, a symbol of human resilience, and a voice for the voiceless. The world had responded, not just with words, but with action. But Malik was not the type to rest on his laurels. He knew that the fight for social change was ongoing. The refugee crisis was still a dire issue, and while awareness had grown, real solutions were still elusive. His art had brought attention to the problem, but now it was time to ensure that the momentum was sustained. The global conversation needed to evolve into concrete action, political change, humanitarian aid, and long-term solutions for those who had been displaced. The international attention that Malik's art had attracted didn't go unnoticed by world leaders. Several governments had pledged to increase their aid to refugees, and many had begun to rethink their policies on asylum and resettlement. But Malik knew that the real change would come from grassroots movements, the people who had felt the pulse of the crisis in their own lives and communities. With Marcus Santos by his side, Malik continued to work with local activists and organizations to build on the momentum. They partnered with grassroots movements in both developing and developed countries, creating a network of support for refugees that spanned the globe. They were no longer just raising money, they were raising awareness about the systemic changes that needed to happen on a political level to address the root causes of displacement. In parallel, Malik's art continued to evolve. His pieces became more diverse, depicting not only the suffering caused by displacement but also the strength and resilience of communities who had overcome hardship. He painted portraits of refugees who had rebuilt their lives, of individuals who had turned their trauma into strength, of families who had found hope in the most unlikely of places. As Malik's work expanded, so did the reach of his message. His paintings were now being displayed in not just art galleries, but also in government buildings, humanitarian centers, and public spaces around the world. People who had never before thought about the refugee crisis began to see it in a new light, not as an abstract problem, but as something that directly impacted humanity, something that required collective effort to solve. The art world had once doubted Malik's potential, seeing him as just another artist trying to make a name for himself. Now, Malik was recognized as one of the most influential voices in the global fight for human rights and social change. His work was no longer just about aesthetic beauty, it had become a tool for social transformation, a catalyst for building a more compassionate and inclusive world. But the most profound change had come in the form of people's attitudes. The world was beginning to understand that the refugee crisis was not just a political issue, but a humanitarian one. It was no longer just about borders and policies, it was about the lives of millions of people, each with their own hopes, dreams, and potential. Malik's art had shown the world that refugees were not victims, they were survivors, they were warriors, they were human beings who deserved dignity and respect. Through all of this, Malik never lost sight of the purpose that had driven him from the start. His art had always been about telling the stories that had been left untold, about shining a light on the people and communities who had been forgotten by the mainstream world. And now, his art was doing exactly that, sparking change, shifting perceptions, and inspiring millions to stand together and fight for what was right. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Malik found himself alone in his studio once more. The space was filled with unfinished pieces, canvases brimming with potential. He picked up a brush and began to paint, letting the colors flow onto the canvas without thinking too much about the final result. It was a moment of reflection for Malik, a moment where he could simply create for the sake of creation, without the weight of expectation or the pressure of a global movement on his shoulders. As he painted, he thought back to the early days of his career, when he had been just another struggling artist, ignored by the world. He remembered the rejection he had faced at Lyle's gallery, the sneers from critics who hadn't understood his work, the loneliness he had felt in those early years. But now, Malik knew that his journey had led him to a place far beyond his wildest dreams. His art had brought people together in ways he could never have imagined, and in doing so, it had changed the world. Malik's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Marcus, who had come to update him on the latest developments. The international coalition they had built was making great strides in addressing the refugee crisis, and several countries had agreed to a new framework for resettling refugees. The future was still uncertain, but the change was undeniable. Malik, Marcus said with a smile, I think it's safe to say that humanity has answered the call. We've made a difference. Malik stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked around the studio at his paintings, the stories he had told, the battles he had fought, the hope he had shared. And in that moment, Malik realized something profound. The real legacy of his art wasn't the recognition, the exhibitions, or the fame. It was the impact it had had on people's hearts, the way it had inspired them to stand up for what was right, to fight for those who had no voice, and to never forget that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to unite. The fight isn't over, Malik replied, his voice steady and filled with resolve. But we've made a start. And that's all we can do. Keep pushing. Keep fighting. Keep creating. The world was different now. And though the battles ahead would be difficult, Malik knew that humanity had taken its first true step toward change. Together, they had answered the call.